Perhaps every betrayal begins with a single unforgettable sound. Listen closely, and you can feel it reverberate through bones, echoing in the hollow spaces of trust. That's what I want you to hear first, before the rest unfolds, before the weight of deceit and the fire of rage settle into your chest. The living room was quiet when it happened, deceptively so, like the calm before a storm. I had thought this house was a sanctuary, every corner holding laughter and shared memories. The scent of fresh tea lingered in the air, mingling with the soft, comforting aroma of polished wood. And yet, beneath that domestic warmth, tension had been brewing. Unseen, silent, until the moment it erupted. I remember the sharp crack, sudden and merciless as her hand struck my cheek. The sting of it lingered more than physical, an incision into my pride, my composure, my very sense of security. My face burned, the pulse in my temples thrumming like a warning drumbeat. "Give me the house keys," she shouted, her voice slicing through the air like jagged glass. I froze, heart hammering in chaotic rhythms, and time seemed to dilate around that command. Every thought slowed, each beat of my heart a loud declaration that the world I had known had been replaced by something unrecognizable. The daughter-in-law's eyes blazed with audacity, cold and calculating, and I realized then that this confrontation was no accident. She had rehearsed it in her mind, sharpened it with intention, and now it was executed flawlessly, leaving me raw, exposed, and burning with humiliation. The cushions of the sofa were overturned from some earlier scuffle. The tea I had poured now half-cooled, forgotten. The faint trace of her perfume, a subtle, sweet scent, clung to the air, but now it seemed predatory, masking the betrayal with a guise of familiarity. My chest tightened as I tried to steady my breathing, the room stretching impossibly around me. The other family members had frozen, whispers dying on their lips, their eyes darting between her and me, unsure how to intervene. The silence was heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were watching, judging. How had loyalty twisted into audacity? My mind raced, replaying every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every gesture of trust. None of it seemed real anymore. Every memory now felt like a prelude to this moment of calculated cruelty. The audacity of her demand, the boldness of her strike left a bitter taste on my tongue, a mixture of shock and a growing, simmering rage. I clenched my fists, knuckles white against the polished edge of the dining table. Each tremor of my hands mirrored the storm inside me, a tempest of humiliation and wounded pride. I studied her face, the sharp lines of defiance carved into her expression. She had crossed boundaries that I had never thought possible. I realized with a sinking clarity that this was more than a quarrel over property or control. This was a demonstration, a statement of power, a challenge thrown at the foundation of everything I had built and protected. Her confidence, bold, unyielding, infuriating, was meant to unnerve me, to test my reactions and perhaps to make me falter. But in that moment, humiliation transformed into something darker, sharper, a seed of calculated resolve planted deep and ready to grow. My gaze swept the room, noting the subtle reactions of those present, the son who avoided my eyes, the quiet aunt frozen mid-step, the cousin shifting uneasily. Their indecision, their uncertainty, only heightened the impact of her audacity. I could feel the collective tension, the almost imperceptible vibrations of fear, awe, and surprise. Every detail, the angle of her stance, the tension in her jaw, the cold gleam in her eyes was etched into my mind, catalogued with precision. The storm outside might rage unnoticed, but inside, a battle was being waged, and I was both the witness and the participant. I pressed my palms to the smooth wood of the dining table, grounding myself. The taste of blood, or maybe just the adrenaline-fueled sting of shock, rose at the back of my throat. My mind churned, racing through scenarios, possibilities, consequences. The clash of memory and reality twisted into something terrifyingly clear. The woman before me had weaponized familiarity, turned trust into leverage, and tested my endurance. And yet, even as anger and humiliation surged, I recognized the spark within myself, the quiet, dangerous flame of retribution that began to take form in the shadow of my shock. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening around us. Every sound became amplified. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant echo of traffic outside. They all pressed against me, reminders that the world had not stopped, Only my universe had been irreversibly altered. I felt the heat of blood in my ears, the rapid hammer of my pulse, and yet beneath the chaos a strange clarity began to emerge. I would not crumble. I would not be reduced to tears or rage alone. Every insult, every slap, every cold demand would be weighed, measured, and stored. I would remember. I would plan. I would respond. She took a step closer, eyes narrowing, voice dripping with expectation and disdain. "The keys now," she demanded again, sharper, unyielding. I allowed myself a slow inhale, filling my lungs with the scent of the room, tea, perfume, polished wood, tension, and exhaled deliberately. Her aggression was meant to provoke, to unsettle, to claim victory through shock. But victory is fleeting, and I had learned in years of observation that moments of audacity often carry the seeds of exposure. I could see it in her posture, the slight twitch in her fingers, the hesitation masked behind bravado. Even the strongest facade has a flaw, and I intended to find it. The memories came unbidden, fragments that stung with clarity. Sunday dinners where laughter had felt genuine, small gestures of kindness, quiet evenings where trust had been effortless, they now seemed like a distant, fragile illusion. Every instance of assumed loyalty was a betrayal in hindsight, a lesson painfully carved into the core of my being. And yet, from the shards of this destruction, a strategy began to emerge, delicate and precise, fueled by both grief and indignation. The humiliation I felt was no longer a weakness, it was a map, a guide, a tool to navigate the treacherous waters of calculated revenge. I shifted my grip on the table, knuckles whitening further, heartbeat a drumbeat echoing in my chest. Each second stretched, the tension coiling tighter with every tick of the clock. Her gaze flicked toward my hands, noticing perhaps the restraint, the unspoken threat held in the sinews of my forearms. She had expected compliance, submission, fear, but I had become something else entirely, a man aware, alert, dangerous in the quiet intensity of his observation. Every movement she made, every word she spoke, was now ammunition for a reckoning yet to come. The scent of tea and perfume mixed with a subtler, darker aroma, the tang of potential violence, the electric charge of imminent confrontation. I could almost hear the whispered calculations behind her defiance, the silent encouragements from unseen allies, the careful orchestration of humiliation. But I was not powerless. I had seen through the facade, traced the web, and understood that strategy, patient, precise, and relentless, would tip the balance. Her audacity had lit the fire, and now I would fan it into a storm she could not withstand. I let my eyes drift toward the corners of the room, cataloging, analyzing, the faint smudge on the armrest, the imperceptible indentation on the rug, the subtle shift of light across the window blinds. Everything was a clue, a potential thread to pull, a crack in the structure of her control. My mind raced, each observation folding into the next, forming a lattice of opportunity and consequence. The betrayal was complete yet incomplete. The stage set, the players revealed, but the outcome undecided. Her voice, cold and insistent, broke the silence again. "Don't test me," she said, a warning disguised as arrogance. But I was no longer merely a recipient of her challenges. I had become the orchestrator of awareness, the silent threat behind a composed exterior. My pulse steadied, the initial shock transforming into a measured, simmering resolve. Each breath deliberate, each glance calculated, each heartbeat a reminder that I was not broken. The living room, once familiar, now resembled a battlefield. Cushions displaced, tea half spilled, faint traces of her scent lingering like a signature of betrayal. I sank slowly into the nearest chair, letting the weight of the confrontation settle across my shoulders. The ache in my face, the sting of pride, the shock to my system, they all blended into a single sharp clarity. I had been betrayed, yes, but I was awake now, aware, vigilant. The seeds of revenge, of justice, of restoration had been planted, and I could feel them take root. I pressed my palm to the edge of the table, fingertips grazing the grain of polished wood, and exhaled slowly. The daughter-in-law's audacity had lit a fire, and I would tend it with patience, cunning, and resolve. Each slight, each insult, each audacious claim to power would be accounted for. I would reclaim what had been tested, exposed, and violated, not with mindless anger, but with the calculated precision of one who has seen through the veil of deception. The room seemed to hold its breath with me, the quiet amplified by my own racing heartbeat. I glanced at her again, standing tall, eyes fixed on mine, waiting for a falter that would not come. I let a slow, deliberate smile touch the edge of my lips, not of submission, but of comprehension. I understood the game now, and I had begun to move my pieces. The storm was far from over, and its first gusts were gathering strength in the silent fury coiling within me. Knuckles white, heart racing, and mind sharpened, I rose. The daughter-in-law had demanded control, had sought to humiliate, had struck at my pride. But I was no longer the man who would bend or flinch. I would watch, I would wait, and I would strike in the moment when the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The living room, the house, the very air around us was charged with anticipation, a suspense so thick it felt tangible. I stepped forward, eyes locked on the audacious figure who dared defy my family, and knew this was only the beginning. The first slap had echoed, but the reverberations of what would follow had only just begun to sound. Before we dive in, take a deep breath with me and listen, because what I'm about to share will make you question everything you think you know about trust and family. Watch closely and feel each heartbeat of betrayal as it unfolds. The house seemed smaller now, as if the walls themselves had tightened in on me, stretching the shadows along corners that once held only warmth and laughter. Each familiar room now felt foreign. The light refracted strangely across polished wood and quiet surfaces, casting long, accusatory shapes that mirrored the unease coiling in my chest. I could almost hear the whisper of every memory, every subtle misstep, as if the air itself had been listening all along. The living room, where I had first faced her audacity, lingered in my mind like a scar, the cushions still displaced, the faint scent of tea and her lingering perfume a taunting reminder that the world I had trusted had quietly shifted beneath me. I started retracing recent events, walking slowly through the house, each step measured, deliberate. The kitchen, the hallways, even the small study where I had once found solace, everything was under scrutiny. I replayed conversations over and over in my mind, parsing the smallest nuances. The daughter-in-law's casual remarks that now rang with subtle venom, the way she glanced at my son when she thought I wasn't watching, the odd hesitations in the tone of my relatives' voices. Every half-smile, every pause, every sidelong glance became a thread in a tapestry I was only beginning to unravel. She had not acted impulsively. That much was clear. Her audacity, her cold precision, was evidence of a pattern, a network of subtle manipulations and hidden alliances I had ignored for far too long. Each memory flickered in my mind like a warning light. The unexplained absences, the secretive meetings whispered about in passing, the casual disrespect hidden beneath polite smiles. Every gesture I had once overlooked now loomed with meaning, a shadowed marker of betrayal. I wandered through the dining room, tracing the scratches on the table where my knuckles had pressed in moments of helpless rage, the faint indentations in the rug where footsteps had betrayed the careful choreography of confrontation. I picked up letters left unopened, their edges curling with age, notes scrawled in the handwriting I had trusted, each word now dissected, each line a potential clue. Receipts from days I couldn't recall in detail, phone messages I had ignored. Every small artifact of ordinary life became a piece of evidence, each one whispering secrets I had been too naive or too trusting to hear before. Sleep evaded me. My body longed for rest, but my mind had become a sharpened instrument, slicing through the fog of grief and humiliation. Anger simmered beneath sorrow, a calculated flame heating each thought, each memory, each quiet observation. I felt every betrayal acutely, a sting that doubled as insight, revealing the contours of a plan I had been blind to, the careful orchestration of a silent coup within the family I'd believed to be loyal. I paused in the hallway outside my son's old bedroom, the door half open. Through the crack, the soft murmur of voices drifted low and careful, almost conspiratorial. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to catch words without being seen. My pulse raced, heartbeat loud in my ears. The daughter-in-law's voice, smooth and controlled, floated through the space, joined by another I could not immediately recognize. Their discussion was deliberate, laden with subtleties, hints I could only grasp with careful attention. I caught fragments, plans, mentions of allies, references to events I had dismissed in the past. The realization hit me like cold water. Her network extended beyond what I had imagined. I had underestimated the scope of her strategy, the precision with which she had drawn her lines, the audacity of those who followed her lead. I leaned against the wall, breath shallow, mind working furiously to connect every dot, trace every movement, predict every next step. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and laughter, had become a labyrinth of deceit. Every corner seemed to hold a secret, every shadow a potential witness. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock, even the creak of the floorboards under my own feet now carried significance. Each sound, once mundane, became a potential clue, a signal in a network of silence and concealment. I moved slowly from room to room, cataloging every detail, letting my grief, my humiliation, and my rage sharpen my perception. I examined the family photographs lined along the mantel, eyes lingering on faces frozen in smiles I had once trusted. The daughter-in-law's presence in those pictures, her subtle interactions with others, all took on new meaning. I felt the subtle inflection in my son's gaze, the half-smile of a neighbor, the faint hesitation of a distant cousin. Each gesture formed a pattern, a blueprint of manipulation and allegiance I was only now beginning to see. The bedroom door creaked behind me as I turned, a sound that made my pulse leap. The house felt alive, vibrating with the tension of unspoken truths. I sank to the floor beside the low table, spreading out letters, receipts, phone logs, fragments of conversations. Each piece became part of a mosaic, a map of betrayal drawn in ink, paper, and memory. I traced the lines with trembling fingers, connecting gestures to words, words to absences, absences to hidden meetings. Every revelation tightened the noose of understanding around the audacity of her plan. Time blurred. Minutes became hours. Hours folded into each other, and yet I remained vigilant, oscillating between sorrow and cold calculation. I felt my emotions harden into instruments of discernment, each surge of grief and each flicker of rage adding clarity to my vision. I could almost taste the anticipation of exposure, the quiet thrill of understanding, the promise of reclaiming the control that had been so arrogantly challenged. A soft whisper drew me from my analysis, subtle, almost imperceptible. I pressed my ear to a half-open door and caught a fragment of a conversation that froze me in place. Her voice, steady and low, spoke of alliances I had not imagined, of accomplices hidden in plain sight, of moves carefully staged to test boundaries and claim control. The magnitude of her audacity, the precision of her orchestration, sent a cold tremor through me. I realized the danger extended beyond the immediate confrontation. It was a network, an intricate web, and I had only begun to pull at the threads. I sank back against the wall, mind spinning, eyes scanning every shadow. The familiar rooms of my home now felt alien, each surface imbued with suspicion, each object potentially a messenger of deceit. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, sweet and poisonous, a reminder of the proximity of treachery. The weight of revelation pressed on me, heavy as the darkness pooling in corners, and yet within that pressure a sharp focus emerged. I had been blind, yes, but now I could see, and in seeing I gained power. I retraced my steps, moving cautiously through the hallways, cataloging every detail, each gesture, each nuanced glance. The house was alive with secrets, and I was both observer and participant, measuring, calculating, remembering. The son who had seemed uncertain, the relatives who had seemed passive, all were part of the network I was beginning to chart. Even the smallest hesitation, a fleeting expression, became a potential clue, a signpost pointing toward hidden truths. The night deepened. The soft glow of streetlights filtered through the blinds, casting fractured lines across the floor, illuminating the scattered evidence before me. I traced patterns across the letters, receipts, and phone records, connecting the invisible dots with precision born of pain and vigilance. Each revelation intensified the tempest within, transforming grief into insight, humiliation into strategy, sorrow into determination. I felt the electric charge of understanding, the thrill of discovery, and the creeping awareness that the house I had trusted as a haven was now a battlefield of shadows. A sudden knock at the front door jolted me, heart leaping, pulse hammering. My breath caught as I froze, listening. Footsteps outside, measured, deliberate. I approached slowly, senses heightened, and a chill ran down my spine. The house, now a place of secrets and strategy, seemed to hold its breath. I lifted the latch just enough to peek through, and the faint outline of a figure standing in the dim light sent a ripple of dread through me. The whispered revelations, the network of deceit, the pattern of alliances, they were all pointing toward something larger than I had feared. And as I closed the door softly behind me, The shadows seemed to pulse, alive with secrets waiting to be unearthed. My pulse thundered in my ears as I realized the magnitude of the challenge ahead. The house that had once symbolized unity now harbored shadows, each corner whispering secrets I must uncover before trust dissolves entirely. And in that charged silence, I knew what I had discovered was only the beginning, and the true extent of the betrayal was still lurking, just beyond sight. Before we continue, I want you to feel this with me. Every heartbeat, every whispered thought, every tensioned glance. Sit quietly and imagine being caught between betrayal and the calm before a storm. I moved through the house like a man stepping into a battlefield he could see but not yet touch. Each room felt alive with tension, the shadows clinging to corners like silent witnesses, and I could sense the air vibrating with secrets I had only begun to uncover. My mind sharpened, each thought slicing through grief and humiliation, transforming it into a keen awareness, a tool I could wield with precision. The daughter-in-law's audacity demanded more than anger. It demanded strategy, a measured approach, a careful orchestration of every interaction, every silence, every carefully observed expression. I sank into the armchair by the window, letting the soft evening light filter across the room, painting fractured patterns on the floor, and I allowed myself a moment to inhale the weight of what had happened. Grief, humiliation, and rage intertwined in my chest, each pulse a reminder of the audacity I faced. Yet beneath that tumult, a calm determination began to rise. I could not afford rashness. I would not allow the chaos she had sown to dictate my actions. Every move I made would be deliberate, every word calculated, every silence a weapon. I started retracing the past days with meticulous attention. The daughter-in-law's casual remarks, the way she exchanged glances with her friends, the half-hidden expressions of my son, every detail coalesced into a pattern of manipulation. There was a method to her audacity, and it stretched further than I had realized. The neighbors' subtle hints, the odd hesitations in casual conversations, even the way her phone seemed to disappear at key moments, all of it spoke to a network I had underestimated. My chest tightened with both dread and exhilaration. Understanding the scope of her design gave me power, but it also revealed how dangerously clever she had been. I opened a drawer and pulled out letters and receipts I had previously set aside, sifting through them like a detective searching for the missing piece of a puzzle. Each folded note, each partially legible message, each record of mundane events now carried weight. I traced the ink with my fingertips, letting my mind connect dots invisible to the casual observer. The more I studied, the more the pattern became clear. Her manipulation had been precise, surgical even, and I'd been blind until now. My pulse thundered with the realization, but I calmed it, letting patience guide me. This was no longer about reaction. It was about control. I observed her friends' glances across the room when they visited, noting the slight flickers of recognition, the almost imperceptible nods, the way they positioned themselves around her as if she were the central node of a hidden web. My son's silence no longer felt passive. It carried weight, an unwilling complicity that had remained masked under familiarity. Even the smallest signs, the tilt of a head, the twitch of a lip, were now clues to alliances I had never suspected. Each revelation sharpened my mind, blending vulnerability with cold calculation. I was wounded, yes, but in that wound I found a clarity I had lacked before. I moved from room to room, testing the strength of my observations. I asked questions casually, in tones that belied the storm behind my eyes. I watched her responses, the subtle shifts in posture, the hesitation in a word or glance, cataloging every reaction with the precision of a surgeon mapping the human body. The house, once a place of warmth and familiarity, had become a chessboard, each gesture a piece to be moved, each expression a hint of hidden strategies. I was patient, deliberate, feeling the weight of every observation as both armor and weapon. Even as I mapped the network of deception, the emotional undercurrent remained raw. I could feel anger flickering like fire beneath the surface, mingling with grief and humiliation. Yet I let it burn quietly, feeding the calculation rather than dictating action. Every heartbeat, every breath was a metronome guiding me through the intricate dance of observation and subtle confrontation. The daughter-in-law's audacity had sparked this transformation. She had forced me to shed naivety and embrace vigilance. I realized that the power she wielded was not invincible. It was measurable, testable, and with care, exposable. I lingered in the study, letting the quiet settle around me, and turned my attention to the documents that had seemed ordinary before. Conversations replayed in my mind, gestures analyzed, timelines reconstructed. Every fragment of communication, every note of inflection, every absence now formed a map of manipulation. My heart raced as the pattern emerged, revealing the depth of her strategy, and yet for the first time I could see my own countermoves. I was no longer merely a victim reacting to audacity. I was an architect of measured response, a strategist preparing for the confrontation she had forced into existence. The night deepened, and shadows stretched across familiar walls, turning ordinary objects into silent witnesses. I paced slowly, testing hypotheses with my questions and observations, letting reactions reveal themselves in micro-expressions, in hesitations, in subtle gestures. Each movement, each word became a probe, designed to test loyalty, expose weakness, and trace the boundaries of the network she had built. I could feel the tension coil within me like a spring, the interplay of vulnerability and calculation driving every decision, every glance, every breath. Then, just as the clock chimed softly, a sound at the door made me freeze. A letter had been slipped under, unsigned, bearing only a warning. The battlefield within these walls was more treacherous than I could have imagined. I lifted the envelope slowly, the paper trembling under my fingers, the weight of anticipation pressing against my chest. Who had sent it? A friend? An enemy, or one of the unseen allies she had cultivated? The uncertainty ignited every nerve in my body, and yet paradoxically it sharpened my mind, forcing each thought into careful alignment with strategy. I traced the words with a fingertip, feeling the ink slightly raised beneath my skin. They hinted at observation, at surveillance, at secrets yet undiscovered. The implications rippled through me, a mixture of dread and exhilaration. The house, once a sanctuary, now seemed to lean in closer, listening, aware of my realization. Every corner, every shadow, every familiar surface had become part of the game, a landscape to be navigated with precision, patience, and calculated emotion. I understood in that moment that the daughter-in-law's influence extended beyond what I had already mapped. She had planted seeds whose roots I had yet to uncover. I sank into the armchair again, folding the letter slowly, letting its presence settle over me. My thoughts raced between action and observation, emotion and reason, vulnerability and strategy. The flame of rage burned quietly, feeding insight while grief sharpened perception. I knew that haste could undo all the careful work I had begun. Impulsive confrontation could tip the scales in her favor. Every decision would now carry the weight of unseen eyes, every move a potential exposure of both truth and vulnerability. I revisited the past days in my mind, step by step, gesture by gesture, word by word. The daughter-in-law's casual precision revealed itself with a cruel clarity. The meetings she had arranged, the words she had spoken in front of others, the networks of subtle manipulation, all part of a grander design. Each revelation layered over the last, forming a lattice of insight and counter-strategy. I felt the duality of my state acutely, wounded yet calculating, vulnerable yet poised to strike, emotional yet disciplined. The storm of betrayal that had erupted into my home was now a map for careful navigation. Each detail a stepping stone to exposure, each hesitation a clue to hidden alliances. I rose, pacing again, letting shadows stretch along the walls, turning familiar furniture into obstacles, allies, and informants. The house hummed with secrets, each sound a potential whisper of information, each silence a deliberate pause, and I moved within it with the awareness of both hunter and prey. I questioned, observed, tested, measured every reaction, every twitch of expression, every micro-shift in stance. I cataloged loyalty and complicity, weighing the potential consequences of each calculated action. My mind sharpened, weaving the threads of emotion and strategy into a tapestry of planned confrontation. Hours passed in deliberate vigilance until finally, the silence of the house seemed to hum with expectation. The daughter-in-law's audacity had created not only chaos but opportunity. I understood now that control could be reclaimed, that the threads of deception could be teased apart, and that patience, observation, and carefully orchestrated exposure could tilt the balance in my favor. Yet even as clarity settled in my mind, the letter on the floor remained a reminder. Unseen players, hidden motives, and silent observers were still active within the walls of this home. The stakes had escalated, and the network of betrayal I faced was more intricate than I had anticipated. I lifted the envelope once more, staring at its blank signature, and let the weight of its warning sink in. My breath caught. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows longer, the silence thicker. Every instinct urged caution, every pulse demanded vigilance. I knew that the confrontation I had prepared for would need precision, patience, and nerves tempered with the fire of controlled fury. I folded the letter carefully, placing it atop the scattered documents that had guided my understanding, and let a single, slow exhale carry away the tremor of fear that lingered at the edges of my awareness. And then, in the hush of the night, I realized something chilling. The daughter-in-law's network was not yet fully revealed. Allies remained hidden, secrets unspoken, motives untested. The game had only just begun, and I was poised on the edge of a confrontation that could shatter everything, or expose the deepest truths I had fought to discern. My heart thundered in anticipation, my mind sharpened to a blade, and the house itself seemed to lean in, waiting with me for the next move. The envelope remained in my hands. The shadows pressed against the walls, and I understood with a shiver of awareness that the internal battlefield I had mapped was far from complete. Every observation, every carefully orchestrated step, would now determine whether I could navigate this web of deceit, reclaim control, and expose the audacity that had invaded my home, or whether I would be blindsided by alliances I had yet to uncover. And in that frozen, breathless moment, I realized the truth that would haunt me until action was taken. The war had only just begun, and the house that had once held my trust now held secrets that could change everything. The day had arrived. The house, once a place of comfort, felt like a courtroom, the air thick with anticipation and the silent pulse of judgment. I stepped into the room with measured composure, each footfall deliberate, grounding myself in the rhythm of my own resolve. My hands rested lightly at my sides, but my heart thundered beneath the surface, a wild drum of grief, anger, and calculated determination. Every eye in the room flicked toward me, curious, uncertain, some wary, some complicit. Every family member a potential ally or adversary in this unspoken war. She was waiting. My daughter-in-law stood there with the same confidence she had always carried, her chin lifted, her posture sharp. But now I saw it. The cracks beneath her facade, the tremor in her hand, the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, the subtle tightness around her jaw that betrayed a panic she could not fully mask. The bravado that had once made her untouchable now felt fragile, like porcelain threatening to shatter under the lightest pressure. The room seemed to contract around us, each shadow stretching toward her, each whisper of air, amplifying the tension that hummed invisibly, but palpably between us. I drew a slow breath and let my gaze sweep the room, cataloging every gesture, every micro-expression. The scent of polished wood, lingering perfume, and the faint trace of forgotten meals mingled with the invisible tension, creating a sensory map of deception and fear. The sofa cushions, slightly compressed from hurried departures, the half-open letters on the side table, the faint scratches along the floorboards, all of it testified to a pattern of subtle manipulation, audacity, and carefully concealed alliances. I allowed the reality of what had happened to crystallize in my mind, turning anguish into clarity, vulnerability into focus, rage into strategic patience. I began softly, almost conversationally, letting my voice slice through the thick quiet. Each word was chosen deliberately, measured, a probe designed to elicit truth, a scalpel carving away at layers of pretense. I asked questions that seemed innocuous, yet each syllable carried the weight of scrutiny, each pause a silent spotlight on the cracks in her composure. My daughter-in-law shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, the sort of gesture that might be overlooked by the casual observer, but spoke volumes to one attuned to subtle betrayals. Family members flinched, whispered to each other under their breath, shuffled on the edges of their seats. Their complicity or fear was visible, a tapestry of reactions that revealed more than words ever could. I traced each glance, each hesitation, cataloged them like a ledger of loyalty and deceit. The house itself seemed to hum in anticipation, walls vibrating with the energy of confrontation, shadows stretching and recoiling as if echoing my growing power over the situation. Every breath I drew, every subtle inflection of my voice, was a signal, a calculated maneuver, Designed to test, expose, and destabilize, she answered, her voice steady but brittle, confidence trembling just beneath the surface. I could feel the weight of every carefully constructed lie pressing against her chest, the dam of arrogance threatening to burst under the pressure I was applying. Each word I spoke, each question I asked was designed to probe, to expose the threads of deception she had so meticulously woven. My heart pounded, but I let it anchor me rather than betray me. I could feel anger rising like molten metal, but I kept it contained, refining it into a lens of precision, a force sharpened for the revelation of truth. I observed her every movement, the curl of a finger, the fleeting glance at a sibling, the subtle narrowing of her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. Each micro-expression told a story, confirming suspicions I had long held, yet revealing that the audacity she wielded extended further than I had anticipated. Her network of subtle manipulation, the alliances she had forged in whispered confidence, the silences she had cultivated, all began to unravel before me like the threads of a tapestry pulled too abruptly. I allowed my own emotions to surface in controlled waves. Grief mingled with rage, humiliation tempered with satisfaction. I saw the devastation my scrutiny wrought across her carefully maintained facade, and yet I kept my voice steady, my tone measured. I did not shout. I did not accuse wildly. Each question, each observation, each subtle emphasis carried the weight of inevitability. I was not seeking revenge in that moment. I was administering clarity, exposing deceit with the precision of a surgeon. Time stretched. Minutes elongated into eternity. The room was a theater, the players moving in the choreography I dictated with quiet patience. I pressed gently, letting my gaze linger where it needed to, letting silence speak where words might fail. The daughter-in-law's hands twitched, lips parted, then pressed together, her eyes darting toward unseen allies. The cracks in her confidence deepened, revealing the panic she had fought to conceal. Even the most subtle gestures, tilts of the head, shifts in weight, hesitations in breath, became confessions in themselves. And then it came, the first real fissure. A micro-expression, barely noticeable if one were not attuned to deceit, betrayed her. Her eyes widened fractionally. The slightest hitch in her voice when she answered a question, a hesitation that punctuated her previously polished response. It was the first tangible admission of guilt, a whisper of intent. I allowed it to hang in the room like a knife suspended in air. Each family member's reaction confirming the tension, the delicate balance between fear and acknowledgement. Between defiance and exposure, I pressed further. Each word I spoke now carried a dual purpose, clarity and calibration. I traced the timeline of her manipulations aloud, detailing actions, absences, subtle interactions that had long gone unnoticed. She stammered, paused, and for the first time I saw uncertainty ripple across her features. My son, silent until now, shifted uncomfortably, the tension coiling in his hands, his eyes flicking away from mine. The network of deceit was becoming visible, layer by layer, each revelation a hammer striking at the structure she had built. I felt a surge of vindication, tempered with an ache of grief. Every violation of trust, every humiliation endured, every whispered lie was being accounted for. Yet I did not gloat. I maintained the calm exterior that my strategy demanded, allowing the room to absorb the weight of my scrutiny. I could feel the daughter-in-law's pulse quicken, the slight tremor in her voice becoming more pronounced, the subtle shrinkage of her posture as the inevitability of exposure settled over her like a shadow. The house, once a repository of warmth and trust, now echoed with the electric tension of accountability. And then, at the apex of this carefully orchestrated reckoning, she faltered. Her shoulders sagged ever so slightly, the composure she had relied on now faltering under the weight of truth. Words spilled, not fully formed, not complete but enough to reveal intent, ambition, and audacity. The confession was subtle, nuanced, but undeniable. The room held its breath, each member suspended in the electric pause of revelation. I watched her, my heart thundering, my mind a precise instrument of observation. Every twitch, every hesitation, every flicker of panic was catalogued, and I knew that the truth had finally broken through the surface. My own emotions surged, not uncontrollably but with the clarity of purpose. Humiliation had been transformed into validation, rage into strategic insight. I allowed a slow exhale, letting the tension settle around me while the confession lingered in the room like a delicate, precarious sculpture, balancing exposure and dignity. My eyes never left hers, measuring, assessing, confirming that the audacity that had so brazenly challenged me was now vulnerable, exposed. The final moments were taut with expectation. The room seemed to contract, walls leaning inward, shadows sharpening, the faint scent of old letters and lingering perfume merging with the tension in the air. Her eyes, wide and shimmering, finally acknowledged the consequences of her actions. Silence thickened, heavy and electric, the pause before the storm, the moment before the resolution that could either heal or further fracture the delicate balance of power. I stood firm, feeling the pulse of authority and vindication coalesce in my chest. The final realization struck me with the subtle force of a storm just beyond the horizon. The confrontation had reached its apex, but the battlefield of my family's secrets was far from exhausted. Each confession, each subtle admission, each tremor in her composure was a signal, a clue, a piece of a puzzle that had yet to be completed. And as I stood there poised between satisfaction and caution, the air thick with anticipation, I understood with chilling clarity that the reckoning was ongoing, and that the shadows of deceit still lingered, waiting for the next move, waiting for the inevitable unraveling that would demand everything I had left to give. The morning light filtered through the blinds, painting long, pale stripes across the polished wooden floor. Each beam seemed to stretch deliberately, illuminating corners that had once held secrets, whispers, and shadows of deceit. The house, which had felt like a battlefield only hours before, now carried a fragile sense of order, as if the walls themselves had exhaled a sigh of cautious relief. I moved slowly through the familiar rooms, my footsteps deliberate, conscious of the silence that had settled like a soft, heavy cloak over everything. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and dust, the residue of sleepless nights, whispered confrontations, and letters that had carried the weight of revelations. I could feel the tension in my own chest loosening incrementally, yet each inhale reminded me of the vigilance that remained necessary. I sank into the armchair by the window, tracing the light with my gaze, letting the warmth of sunbeams touch my face, a quiet contrast to the storm that had raged here for so long. My mind traced the recent events like a delicate map. Every manipulation, every audacity, every calculated gesture that had once threatened to dismantle my world. It all seemed to flow through me now with clarity, distilled into lessons about trust, perception, and the subtle power of observation. I realized that forgiveness was not a gift for them. It was a reclamation of my own authority, a gentle restoration of agency that I had nearly surrendered in the chaos. To forgive did not mean to forget, and it did not erase the scars. It merely allowed me to step forward without being tethered to the corrosive weight of past wrongs. The daughter-in-law's audacity, now fully accounted for, no longer had the capacity to unsettle me. I recalled her expressions, the tremor in her composure as the truths had spilled into the room, each hesitation a testament to her own vulnerability now exposed. And yet, even as the confrontation settled into memory, I understood that the equilibrium I had re-established was delicate. Trust could never be restored to its former naivete, but boundaries had been clearly drawn. The lessons were clear. Authority was a measured balance of patience, vigilance, and moral clarity, not mere assertion. I felt the satisfaction of that reclamation, tempered by the humility of knowing that human error and deception are enduring forces, ever present, always testing the limits of perception and discernment. I picked up the letters that had been scattered across the table during my vigil, the fragile edges of paper carrying the weight of confessions, observations, and careful calculation. My fingers lingered over the ink, tracing each line as though the act could somehow distill the emotional turbulence into tangible understanding. Each note, each written word, became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the agency I had wrested back from manipulation. It was astonishing how small gestures, an overlooked signature, a half-written note, a hesitant reply, could convey as much about intent as spoken words ever could. In that quiet, I recognized the subtle artistry of human deception and the discipline required to navigate it without losing oneself in the storm. I rose and walked through the living room, noting the subtle shifts that had taken place during the days of confrontation. Cushions were straightened, letters stacked, surfaces cleared. physical echoes of the mental and emotional sorting that had taken place. Yet even as the house regained its outward composure, I was aware of the lingering traces of tension in the air, the slight tilt of a photograph, the faint indentation of a pen on paper, the shadow of a hesitation that still clung to memory. These reminders were not threats, they were guides, a way to calibrate my understanding of the people around me and the patterns of interaction that could inform future decisions. The house, once a stage for humiliation, now became a sanctuary for reflection, a repository for lessons learned and strategies forged in the crucible of betrayal. Sitting once again at the dining table, I let my thoughts wander through the intricate web of relationships that had shaped this tumultuous period. My son's silence, once maddening, now spoke to his own awareness and complicity in subtle ways. The daughter-in-law's network, carefully orchestrated, had been revealed and accounted for, boundaries restored, yet the echoes of her audacity remained imprinted in my mind. I realized that these scars, though invisible to others, were reminders of vigilance, patience, and the hard-earned clarity that comes from observing without blind trust. It was a delicate balance, to retain compassion and empathy while enforcing authority and moral clarity. In that balance lay the true measure of resilience. The scent of tea lingered faintly in the room, a reminder of the domestic life that had once seemed ordinary, now imbued with the weight of memory. I reached for the cup, the warmth seeping into my hands, grounding me. Each sip carried with it an acknowledgement of endurance, of the ability to remain present even when confronted with duplicity. Reflection was no longer passive. It was active, a deliberate engagement with both memory and foresight. I considered how small gestures, the careful arrangement of objects, the quiet observation of behavior, the measured response to provocation, had become instruments of clarity and control. My mind cataloged these strategies, recognizing that survival was not merely about reacting, but about anticipating, assessing, and exercising moral discernment. I wandered to the hallway, noting the sunlight glancing off the polished floor, shadows stretching long across the surfaces. Each shadow seemed to carry a story, a fragment of tension, a whisper of decisions made under duress. The house had shifted, its energy transformed from one of oppression and manipulation to a quiet, disciplined authority, one tempered by experience and observation. I felt the weight of this transformation in my chest, a steady thrum of empowerment that flowed through my veins, melding with the lingering ache of betrayal. It was a complex sensation, satisfaction intertwined with humility, vigilance intertwined with the release of corrosive anger, clarity tempered by the knowledge that human error would always be present. Returning to the window, I let the morning light wash over my face, illuminating the contours of fatigue and resolve alike. The outside world moved on, indifferent, yet within these walls a new order had been established. I considered the delicate act of forgiveness, how it was not about absolving the wrongdoer but reclaiming oneself. To forgive was to step forward unburdened, to assert control over one's own narrative, and to engage with life through a lens of moral clarity rather than reactionary anger. In that reclamation I found a strange peace, a gentle empowerment that allowed me to navigate both grief and victory simultaneously. I paused at the mantel, fingers brushing the edges of framed photographs, each image a frozen memory of trust, joy, and connection. Now those images carried dual meanings, reminders of love and evidence of the fragility of human alliances. I traced the faces, noting subtle changes in expression, the lingering traces of deception that had once gone unnoticed. Yet the act of reflection did not paralyze me, it fortified me. Each observation became a lesson, each recollection a reinforcement of vigilance tempered with empathy. The house, once a place of silent accusations and whispered conspiracies, now held a narrative of clarity, a map of experiences that could guide every future interaction. I moved to the letters once more, arranging them meticulously, noting patterns, inconsistencies, and subtle cues that had previously escaped notice. These documents, once symbols of anxiety and uncertainty, had become instruments of insight. Every name, every date, every half-written note revealed layers of human behavior that could be studied, understood, and navigated with precision. I felt the weight of comprehension settle across my shoulders, not a burden but a mantle of authority and self-possession. The daughter-in-law's audacity had been accounted for, her network dismantled through awareness and careful observation. Boundaries had been reasserted, equilibrium restored, yet the room retained the hum of vigilance, a quiet reminder that clarity does not mean complacency. I settled into the sofa, letting the sun fall across my face, letting the stillness of the morning envelope me. My thoughts traced the arc of recent events, the crescendo of confrontation, the meticulous mapping of deception, and the subtle victories earned through patience and discernment. I allowed myself to feel the duality of satisfaction and grief, the intermingling of empowerment and loss. The lessons were indelibly etched into my mind. Trust must be earned, vigilance maintained, and moral clarity asserted. Forgiveness measured and deliberate was a tool of liberation, not acquiescence. Through this lens, I could see the past, understand the present, and prepare for a future tempered by insight and resilience. Yet even in this fragile peace, a whisper of unease lingered. The daughter-in-law's subtle admission, the network of influence she had wielded, the human capacity for duplicity, all these forces reminded me that equilibrium is not permanent. Each day, each interaction, each subtle glance could carry implications that demanded attention. The house, though calm, retained its memories, its shadows, and its potential for revelation. I was alert, reflective, empowered, yet aware that life, like the morning light through these blinds, was never completely still. I allowed myself a final sweep of the room, observing details that others might overlook. The angle of a photo frame, the faint indentation of a pen on a letter, the whisper of wind across the blinds. Each detail spoke to lessons learned, strategies formed, and vigilance required. I felt the subtle rhythm of life reassert itself, the pulse of agency flowing through me, tempered by empathy and understanding. The daughter-in-law had been held accountable, the boundaries restored, yet the story did not end in complacency. It continued in awareness, in measured observation, in the quiet assertion of moral and emotional authority. As the morning deepened, I rose once more, letting the sunlight brush across my hands and face. I traced the edges of the letters, the lines of the furniture, the subtle cues of the house itself. Each object, each shadow, each trace of human presence was a reminder of the delicate balance between justice, emotional intelligence, and survival. I felt the power of reflection, tempered by the scars of conflict, and recognized that strength was not only in confrontation, but in understanding, patience, and deliberate action. I exhaled slowly, letting the quiet satisfaction of insight settle within me. The house, once a battlefield, now offered a measured sanctuary for contemplation, a space where moral clarity and emotional resilience coexisted. And yet, just as the last rays of light stretched across the floor, brushing against the edges of the scattered letters, I sensed it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, a whisper at the threshold of awareness, a movement too subtle to identify, a presence just beyond the frame of perception. My pulse quickened. Even in this fragile resolution, the shadows had not fully relinquished their hold. The equilibrium I had restored was real but tentative, and the story, though quieter, was not finished. The house still held its secrets, and I knew with a chill of anticipation that vigilance would never truly rest. The morning sun bathed the room in light, yet each corner whispered, promising revelations yet unseen. I clenched my fists briefly, grounding myself in this calm before the unknown. My eyes lingered on the threshold, the faintest sign that the story I thought concluded might have only begun to turn its next page. And in that suspended moment I realized, the reckoning, though measured, was far from over. Shadows lingered, alliances unseen waited, and the delicate balance of trust and authority remained a puzzle that demanded my constant attention.